Welcome to the Humanergy Leadership Podcast. My name is David Wheatley. We're here to talk leadership in small, bite-sized and practical chunks. Enjoy. So this episode, I'm joined once again by my wise sage colleagues, the good doctors, Rick Eigenbrod and Judy Brown. And we're talking about murmurations. And if you've ever seen starlings fly, that may bring back that thought of what a murmuration is. But we really want to dig into finding patterns and coherence in chaos. And I think you're starting us off, Judy.
Right. So what started this off is a colleague of mine from Ford Motor Company who out of the blue, these are out of the blue things, sent a video of murmurations of starlings in England. And I'm going like this on the screen for those of you watching the video, because that's what happens. The starlings take off and they fly like a cloud, like a moving, evolving cloud. And there's something just astonishing about it, about how does this happen? And it took me back to something that caught my mind probably a couple of decades ago in the work of Meg Wheatley, Margaret Wheatley, in her book, The Leadership in the New Science, and her exploration of what helps create or helps us see order in the midst of chaos. So the piece of this that had grabbed me was a mathematical one. At some point, a group of guys got curious. They knew about the murmurations. They got curious about whether or not they could program random dots on a computer screen in such a way that they would operate like the murmurations, the flocks. And the question was, was there a mathematical formula? Me as a non-mathematician got fascinated by this mathematical formula that if you gave an individual dot or an individual bird these rules, they would, together with the others, form a murmuration. So the answer to that was, at that point, the guys came up with those three very simple rules, so simple that if you tossed the random dots on a computer screen and you also built in a tree in the way, they would flock around the tree and miss it. And the rules were three rules. The first was fly about, and these are rough mathematical rules, fly about as fast as the other birds. Second rule, fly sort of to the center of the flock. Third rule, don't get too close to the next bird. Leave some space between you and the next bird. And when those three operated, random dots became a murmuration, a flock flying around. And it interested me because I began to wonder whether there were rules like that that could impact organizational life or human behavior or a variety of things that we all have our hands on. And so that's what got me started on this. David, Rick, weighed in.
It's also interesting to think about looking up at the patterns to see whether there are equations in there that get to the chaos.
Right.
And the thing that springs to my mind is an old experiential activity that with a large group of people in a room, you just get everybody to focus on one person, not to tell them who they're focused on, but then to stay 6 feet exactly away from that person. And then after a little while, you get them to focus on a second person, and they have to stay exactly 3 feet away from that person while staying exactly 6 feet away from the other person. And that creates a human murmuration.
I can't wait to do this. I've never heard of this.
We just need to find a large group and then
We
say,
need to
okay,
find a large group. We may be
yeah.
able to do that. Oh, wow.
So finding looking for patterns and the rules that would allow us to operate together in a way that made sense or looking at the patterns that we see in chaos to see if we can make some sense of chaos. Rick?
Or to make order out of chaos. Judy, thank you, by the way, for bringing this subject up. It really brought me in lots of different directions. One of which was to, I think what we said, each of us has had the privilege and the pleasure of some years ago, and now it seems like many years ago, spending time with Meg Wheatley and Myron Kellner Rogers, and at the time her cutting edge work and taking information principles from the sciences and applying it to organizations and leadership. And I think one of the things that you're offering us this topic on Murmerations was one of the things that really struck me is, where does order come from? And the notion that in so many places in our lives, order comes from hierarchy, authority, and hence you get organizational charts, and you get deference to the leader, et cetera, et cetera. And the Murmerations and the 3 simple rules is a great example of how can we have, out of what could be a chaotic situation, how do we create order through the notion of having some simple rules that everyone follows, and no matter what happens externally, the organism is very adaptive if it simply continues to follow these 3 rules. And it's a very different way of thinking. And I thought, what if, as an experiment, a leader stepped before the organization, minimally the leader's team, and said, I just discovered I've got a medical issue, and the treatment's going to be a little rough, and it's going to take me away for 6 months. Here's what I would leave you with in terms of what I would ask you to do, what I would ask you to follow. And here are my 3 rules. Wow. What would you as a leader leave as 3 rules? And if it works for the starlings, why couldn't it work for an executive team? Think about the implication of the team sitting there and being faced with this, and all the things that would change and be different, and that would be a part of their experience. I mean, I think each of us could roll that out very quickly, but I would ask people who are, just as an exercise, just as a kind of mental exercise, think about if you were gone and not able to be there to lead on a regular basis, your team and your organization, what 3 rules would you leave them with that they could then follow?
Yeah, it's fascinating listening to that, because we have them, and I'd not really thought about it that way, but we frame it around orient to the greater good. So the interconnectedness, commit to impact, and so we're actually going to do something, and then focus on people and relationships. And if you tie those 3 things in, then you should be making a transformative leadership choice, which is what we talk about, Humanergy.
David, that's a fabulous example. What I notice about it is, it isn't about any group in particular. It's not just directed at customers. And I have a brilliant colleague. Her name is Jill Janoff, and she has one of her sort of truisms is this: if it is not in us, it cannot be in our products and services.
Wow.
Isn't that brilliant?
Yes.
So it's not like this is just about an external focus. It's not just about an internal focus. And David, the 3 things you laid out are Jill would, we could think of them now that we're thinking from the framework of Meg Wheatley, we could think of those as a fractal. At every level of the system, these three principles will create patterns. They will create structures, right? And so that team will have to create structures, processes, systems, relationships, what have you, to implement, if you will, to make visible these invisible rules. And we can almost feel inside, in the doing, there's such benefit, not the least of which we will grow them up. They will grow themselves up.
Because that fractal idea, we quite often in organizational development will talk about the individual, the team, and the organization. And you're saying that my three rules apply at all three of those. And you can see the pattern getting bigger as you get to the larger level thinking.
Yeah, the organization in its many forms, and Jill would say in its products and services, right? Which is an expression of the same thing. So when you say to the customer, what's your experience with this? They would say something that would reflect that.
Right.
And so that notion of fractals, an order that is created simply by having, let's just go with your principles, David. I mean, one can think on a larger scale, that's all culture is. I mean, Edgar Schein says, culture is the underlying set of beliefs, values, and assumptions that govern and determine behavior. We think of culture as what you see. He's saying it's what you don't see. We could think of, the values, et cetera, et cetera. Those are principles. And following those principles creates the visible. And so I remember going into a company once, and we were having a team thing, and they kept talking about their values, And I go, and they said, we have the values, and you can look at them. I go, where are they? And they said, oh, well, they're over there. And over there was, if you open the door and leave it open, you can't see the values. And I remember thinking, values is not what we see on the walls. Values is what we see in the halls.
Yeah.
And values isn't, for me, values, it's gotten to be such a loaded term. Values are what I have and you don't, right? But if you translate values into mattering, then you're going to see it in the hall. You don't have to put it on the wall.
Mm-hmm.
It strikes me, Rick, I was thinking as you said this about maybe it's not values, maybe it's practices. So what I've been noodling with as I've been listening to you guys, particularly to David's activity, which I can't wait to try, 6 feet away, 3 feet away, is an experience that I've had with my colleagues. I've been leading a leadership development program for now 18 years. And we've changed elements of it, but I was trying to think what has been absolutely part of it from the start. And I would add, trying not to pat myself on the back, but simply pat on the back 18 years worth of really fine people. People come out of that year together saying that it's changed their lives. And many of them stay in touch with each other, particularly when things are difficult in their work, decades after they've been through that experience. And so I was thinking to myself, what is in place in their year together, gathering in person and on Zoom, that creates this kind of web of connection. So the best I can do is this. At first, I thought it was because we have people sit in circles, but I want to come back to that. I think it's the practices that cause people to sit in circles. And the best I can do in 3 practices is this. First, listen. Second, operate with great questions. And in conversation, always be one at a time without interruption. So it's listen, focus on great questions, and operate one at a time without interruption. And I'd not thought about it before, but when you do that, people will sit in circles.
Yeah.
That's the only way you can do those things, is to sit in a circle. And the other thing that happens is, it's what you guys said about scaling. It happens in 2s, it happens in 3s, it happens in 8s, it happens with all 60 of them in a room. It happens on the phone.
Does it happen with clients in that organization? Would I see that behavior on
Yes.
a day-to-day basis in the interaction between the organization and its clients? And that would really be the fractal. You know, if it's not in us, it cannot be in our products and services.
Right.
And I would say, Judy, that doesn't occur because you have a circle. I would say it occurs because you have the 3 practices. And again, we could say practices, principles, rules, whatever you want to call it. That circle, that structure comes out of
those principles.
Not the circle creates the principles.
Yep, I think you're right. And it's never dawned on me before until this conversation, that if you put those 3 things in place, people will create circles.
Yes, because they'll figure out, it'll be messy and sloppy, et cetera, et cetera. Just like if I said, here's 3 principles, see you later.
Right, right.
And you know, the byproduct of that, maybe the most important product of that for me, is it'll grow them up.
Right. And I was thinking of your question of, and would you see it in the clients? The client base is elders. And I'm just thinking of the power of listening, asking great questions, and essentially not interrupting, which is one at a time without interruption. The impact of that on elders living in sometimes communal settings, sometimes not.
Judy, think about, I mean, that's a really powerful imagery and setting for us these days, right? I mean, one of the things that I think as we get older, we become invisible.
Yes.
We lose a sense of control and power and influence and the sense that I have control over my own fate, et cetera, et cetera. So I go into these institutions and it's all about telling. Because we know best and we're going to take care of you. That's what leaders can be seduced into. That I know best. And not only that, by the way, as an aside, I found that as I thought about this, Judy, my old clinical psychologist jumped on my back.
You have to watch out for that. What did
I got to watch out for that on a regular basis.
What did he say?
But he said, what is that all about?
He can't tell you because of patient confidentiality.
Yeah, right. What he said was, or what he thought about, what that clinical psychologist thought about was, what drives that?
That's a great question.
What drives that? And if you think about it, what drives it is early on, we come from and evolve from a position of dependency, right? And the notion of mom and dad know best, which translates into so-and-so knows best, so-and-so knows best, so-and-so knows best, my teachers know best, the religious leaders know best, the government people know best, everybody knows best. And when we get, and there's always a tension between this kind of looking to the authority figure, particularly in times of stress and uncertainty, because that dependency inclination takes over, and we look to the authority figure and defer to the authority figure to essentially to reduce our anxiety, to reduce the chaos, right? And yet at the same time, we want to fight the authority figure, right? And we want the freedom. And so that tension never goes away. And when that authority figure stands in front of us and says some version, and I think I've told a story, and I'm happy to try and recount it, where I've watched authority figures basically say in a time of tension and chaos and uncertainty and stress, and people want to put on the authority that kind of responsibility, which is so seductive to respond to with creating order out of chaos through hierarchy and order and control. I was gobsmacked to see a leader not take the bait.
Right.
It was seriously, it's seared in my brain that because the minute the leader takes the bait, that leader now supposedly knows all, sees all, etc., and will tell us what to do. And you have just taken all creativity, all intellect, all experience, all possibilities out of everybody else.
Right.
And so this tension we will always feel between wanting to create, particularly in times of stress, of wanting to create order out of control, hierarchy, or order out of, as David says, principles, is all that tension is always going to be there. And I think it falls to the leader to first and foremost be aware of the seduction. And by taking over and taking control, that authority figure not only calms the audience, they calm themselves.
But
that's what the clinical psychologist would say.
But they create a world, a process that's not sustainable and doesn't allow other people to use, as the clinical psychologist would say, to grow up, to become, to grow into their own capacities. The other
and
thing,
to limit the resources that are available.
Right.
So the two magic words I watched the same leader do in two different circumstances, and it was amazing. The one thing he said was, at some point, he was frustrated because he was tired. He had been traveling. He agreed to come have dinner with us. The group had all been having pub time. You guys have spent, pub time. We'd all been having pub time, and he showed up at dinner. And he said, okay, what's on your brain? I think I've told the story. And somebody starts saying, well, why do we do this? I'll spare you the detail. And he listened, and he goes, wait, I'm not sure what you're saying. Why do we do this? And it was so seductive. I don't know, let me look into it. Gee, that's terrible. Well, I don't know. His response was, what makes you think I know more about this than you do?
Wow.
Judy, wow is an understatement. And I look at my colleague and we went, wow, with big eyes. And he said, I don't know, you guys, why do we do this? Why did this happen? And somebody in the group said, well, when we did this acquisition, this happened, and as a result, that happened and that happened. And somebody said, well, if you were going to do the acquisition, you should have talked to us in terms of what the impact was. And all of a sudden, the organization is acting exactly like one would want them to act. The wisdom is in the system.
So it's interesting so far, because we're on one hand challenging to say, what are the three questions that help create the system and the structure in your absence? And on the other hand, we're saying, be comfortable with that chaos for a while. You don't need to solve it.
I think that's why the leader an effective leader who could do that, that's where you get the big bucks.
Because they're maintaining that balance between those two things. I'm not looking necessarily, I'm not inserting the three rules. I'm willing to live with the chaos until the three rules emerge naturally from the group.
Right.
Or I can give you three rules. Here's the one rule I saw him in the other circumstance. They came to him, again, big time, big stakes. That said, and I think I've told the details of the story, so I won't now. They said, look, we've been in this program that we're blah, 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 and we did system thinking and blah, blah, blah. And individually, 4 groups who are going through this program came up with the same, it's really startling aha. That is, if we don't get capital expenditure under control, we're going to go broke. And all 4 groups, first they talked to each other to realize, oh my God, we did the same thing. Then representatives from all the organization went to him and said this. And you know what his response was? Here's his principle. Let me know what you need from me.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what it takes to do that? A grown up.
To not defend, to not take over, to not pontificate, to all the things that are a temptation in that kind of situation.
And that's the ultimate in making the switch in my mind, and the switch being something that in my work I deal with a lot. That one from being I'm the savior, I rush in and I solve every problem, I fix it, and I've done very well in my career in fixing it. And now you're asking me to create a culture where other people fix it, and it's no longer my job to fix it.
Right.
That peak kind of unconscious competence level is your guy, who's just naturally saying that, and and pushing the pattern back to the people who are in the pattern.
And in the first occasion, it was because he was tired and he was frustrated, and it came out of some place in him that was fantastic. And again, if I'm the psychologist, what is that at its essence? I'm not going to take the dependency relationship.
Right.
Daddy, I'm in jail. Come and get me out. Mom, can you bring me my paper? I forgot it at home. If you don't bring it to me, I won't get an A in my honors class, and I won't be able to go to Harvard. And right, people, any variant in organizations of people going into the leader and going, "Whoa, we got this problem," and what really gets them is saying, "I don't know what to do."
But I think because you're saying that came from he was tired and all those other things. I actually think if he was just operating from being tired and frustrated, he'd have given him the answer.
One would think, David, I was really surprised.
Yeah.
I don't think to this day he knows where that came from.
It was in there somewhere.
Somewhere. It's like, in some way, if I say the natural inclination was to be exactly what you said. Take over, tell them what to do, etc. Let me look into it. I'll get my guys on, whatever. I think it was the sense about you're putting the dependency relationship on me, and I don't have the resources to take it right now, so I'm pushing it back to you. And that statement, think about the brilliance of that statement. Think about the implication of that statement for leaders. What makes you think I know more about this than you do?
Mm-hmm.
You know, what this reminds me of is the stories about Lyndon Johnson, who would sit in his office and he had glasses like Rick does, and that, and he'd look over the top of the glasses, and people would come in because he was president and just, bring him just one huge problem after another and try to throw it on the desk. And he would listen to their ranting and raving, and then he would look more closely at them over the top of the glasses and say, and therefore?
Which is the goes back to, is it the 1974 Harvard article on that referred to tasks and these things as the monkeys on your back.
Yes.
And I forgot, you'll remember who it was that wrote that one, I'm sure, Judy, but
somebody by the name of Onken. And I cannot believe at this point I can remember that. I forget my relatives' names, but that one.
and it aligns with David Marquette's idea, you push decision-making down to where the information's at.
Yeah.
And I wonder if your guy in the example, Rick, is somebody who is so attuned to pushing decision-making to where the information's at, that was muscle memory.
I don't doubt it, David. I mean, look at, have you two been involved with the workout process that GE developed some years ago? It's the same. It was a structure that came from Jack Welch being frustrated of going around and people griping and griping and griping. And he just got frustrated with it. And they said to the people at Crotonville, I think, will you guys do something to address these issues? I'm getting tired of hearing them. What do they expect me to do? And they developed this very powerful process called workout. And the essence was, we're going to bring people in a room who know most about the problem. They're going to spend time defining the problem, so we're all agree on what the nature of the problem is, because we all know now problem naming is sometimes the hardest thing. Getting agreement on the name of the problem, which we bypass on a regular basis because we get frustrated and go to action steps. You get them in a room and you watch them work, and they will turn to the facilitator on many occasions and go, well, what are we supposed to do about that? And here's the fractal. The facilitator's got to put them back on their own resources. So they get agreement on a problem. The people in the room have self-selected around the problem. I know a lot about this. They agree on a solutions, and at the end, all the big bosses who had been there in the beginning to say, here's what you do, they've been gone for 3 days. They come back and you present. They present. The group say, here's the problem, here's the solution. Do we have your agreement? It's that simple. And the bosses have to say yes or no in the moment. The most they can say is, give me 2 days. I forget what the boundary conditions were. It's a structure that emerged from what we're talking about. I don't know.
But I think that because you kind of got a pattern here of these things, don't you? So that comfort with chaos, that don't allow the dependency transfer, and the kind of black belt level leader that is pushing the decision making down to where the information's at. And then I think the other side that we started with the 3 rules for an autonomous system, which is kind of what they were looking for with that murmuration computer idea. They go so well together in my mind.
They do, don't they?
Because the leader should be pushing back on that question. And in some ways, what the examples you've given have said in loose terms is, you tell me what the 3 rules are that will allow this system to run.
Yes, without me.
Yeah.
Without me. And David, one of the things, and Judy, this also connecting the dots from previous conversations. This is what I call the ability of the leader to follow. Great leaders have the ability to follow, so that leadership and followership are not embedded in an org chart. And therefore, we can create leaders where necessary. Our organization has the capacity to create leadership through the ability of the leader to follow and the followers to lead.
Which is also interesting, because we at Humanergy have some debates with some of the followership community, because we're not big fans of followership just because of our definition of leadership. And it's interesting to loop it back. Our definition of leadership is the choices we make that influence the people around us on 2 continuums. One is where my focus of care is, from self to greater good. And the other one is where my commitment is, from comfort to impact. And if you remember the 3 things I said earlier, greater good, commitment to impact, and then the third one, which gets a little bit more complicated in the graphic version of it, is the relationships, the criticality of people in this. And those 3 things are what make the difference between a great leader and a poor leader, is where they are on each of those 3 continuums.
Yeah. And I think that, again, forgive the lens, the role of anxiety in ourselves, in our teams, in our organizations is really critical. And one of the one-liners I have come up with that through observation is this: the organization will tolerate as much anxiety as the leader can stand.
So the leader has to get very not comfortable as much as courageous in the face of anxiety, and be able to, the phrase that comes to mind for me is stand still. Don't do something, stand there. So
it's a capability, Judy. I think it's a capacity to bind one's anxiety, not to not have it.
Right.
But to in some way bind it so it doesn't slop over. Because the moment, first off, that anxiety is a communicable disease. Secondly, it'll translate. You ever get in a room and somebody's really anxious and all of a sudden everybody's anxious?
That's true.
and secondly, it creates boundary conditions.
Mm-hmm.
Don't go there, you make her nervous.
And so you don't go to places that need to be gone to. Wow.
So I think I love the conversation again, and we're rapidly running out of time. Once again, even though we had nothing to talk about this week.
Except birds.
Except for birds. That was the internal joke. There's I know you've got something to finish on, Rick. There's a couple
David.
There's a couple of thoughts just before that finish that, as you were talking about the 3 criteria, in February, I get to go back to London from the 40th anniversary of me joining the police and going into the boot camp version. And I was thinking about the guy who introduced us there when we first got there, pretty much said, look, doesn't matter where you all came from, you're all equal. You're all in this group in the same footing. He said, this is going to be a challenge for every single one of you in one way or another. This is going to be a challenge, and you can't get through it on your own. And right. I just think that's kind of an interesting way of framing,
isn't it?
Whether he knew it or not, there was the 3 rules that set the conditions for what we had to do as recruits
40 years ago.
And then the other thing is just a snippet. Old soccer playing friend of mine, Dr. Jeffrey Cox, who's now retired, lives out your part of the world, I think, Rick, was immaculate in everything he did, detailed in everything he did, had a massive bookshelf in his collegial office, and everything was in alphabetical order and exactly the right spot, and everything was fronted up to the edge of the bookshelf so that it was absolutely neat, apart from one book which dangled out, and that was a book on chaos. Just made me laugh.
That is a fabulous story, David.
So you're going to close us out, Rick?
Yeah,
I do. If you'll forgive me, I'm going to read from Meg Wheatley's book, Leadership in the New Science. Fluctuations, randomness, and unpredictability at the local level in the presence of guiding or self-referential principles cohere over time into definite and predictable forms. These ideas speak with a simple clarity to issues of effective leadership. They bring us back to the importance of simple governing principles, guiding visions, strong values, organizational beliefs, the few rules individuals can use to shape their own behavior. The leader's task is to communicate them, to keep them ever present and clear, and then allow individuals in the system their random, sometimes chaotic looking meanderings. This is no simple task.
Thanks very much for joining us again for this deep episode. If you noticed, we've been referencing the work of Meg Wheatley, Margaret Wheatley. She's she might be related, it turns out, but not through the Wheatley side of things. So if she's out there and listening, maybe we'll get her on. We also want to get on the guy that started this at some point. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Judy.
The pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, David.
We'll see you next time. That was the Humanergy Leadership Podcast. My name's David Wheatley. For further information about Humanergy, go to humanergy.com or check out our latest book, What Great Teams Do Great, from all good bookstores. Have a good one. Stay healthy.